Today, the word nerds are talking about pacing, and when I say the word nerds, I mean all of them. Hello, word nerds! Today we are talking about pacing, specifically giving examples of some of the word nerds' favorite stories that we think handle pacing well. So to kick things off, I wanted to talk about 1,000 Pieces of You by Claudia Gray, which is a YA sci-fi time travel / alternate reality story. The main character is jumping through different time periods or alternate realities or different ways her life could have gone, jumping into her own body and trying to find her father's murderer. So because this story covers a bunch of different time periods or just different situations of how the main character's life could have gone, there is a really natural flow to the pacing where you get to jump from section to section. Each section has kind of its own story as the main character figures out her alternate reality life and tries to follow clues. So it came together really nicely in terms of just having these beginnings and ends that were a little more farther reaching than chapters. So if you struggle with pacing, you can look at this story for a way to kind of work in different ebbs and flows to your story so that there are little mini stories within a wider arc in order to keep things moving forward.
If you're looking for a book with good pacing, I strongly recommend Mask of Shadows by Lindsay Miller. This book reminded me a little bit of the first Hunger Games book in that it was go, go, go the whole entire time. Basically, the main character is fighting for their life against multiple antagonists. It also manages to balance some of the nonstop action with a few quieter moments for readers to breathe, including a really nice romance between two of the characters, as well as some sort of court intrigue scenes, which are still full of tension but less murdering. But I really enjoyed this nonstop action. Just a real page turner. The pacing was great. There was never a moment that dragged on or became boring, since Sal, our main character, was pretty much either in constant danger or embroiled in court politics.
A book that I thought did pacing superbly is Lifelike by Jay Kristoff. This is a gritty, gross dystopian about a world so far in the future that is just full of mutated creatures and radioactive energy and cyborgs and AI. This is not a book to casually read. This is fast-paced. You are on the back of that motorcycle and it's just going and you are hanging on for dear life. This was almost too fast-paced, and I say almost because there are moments of quiet and recollection and realization that are sprinkled throughout here, but it's just things just keep happening. It's a constant state of you can never sit down or relax because something else is coming. Every scene is on the heels of the next scene. There is no downtime, and that can be very difficult to read, but also to write because, well, what if I don't know what's gonna happen next? Because this world is so intricate, and because there's so many side characters, this really works in here because anytime that there's a down moment, surprise, there's another character that wants to kill the main person, and you're like, all right, well, I guess here we go again. A lot of books that have fast pacing have those action scene, now quiet scene, now action scene, now quiet scene. I'm not saying that's bad, but the mix-up of having action scenes and information being thrown at you at the same time makes it a more dynamic scene because your brain has so many things to follow. For some people that can be confusing and, again, too fast-paced, but I personally really liked it. You're just on the edge of your seat the whole time, and because there's so many details being thrown at you, you're super engaged in the characters and in the plot. If you like dystopian at all, hell, even if you don't like dystopian, you want to check this out because this is one of my favorite books and it kept me up until 2 a.m.
One book that I think has really good pacing is Three Dark Crowns by Kendara Blake. And one of the reasons I think that it has such good pacing is because of the change in point of view between the different girls. In this book, I noticed that they used a technique that is really common in television, where you end a chapter on a high note where you really want to know what happens next, and then you completely switch to something different. It keeps you engaged long enough to want to keep reading without feeling like there's things undelivered because you know that you'll get back to them eventually. I think that there are very few dull spots in that book. It's one of my favorites, and one of the reasons it's my favorites is because of the pacing.
A book that I thought was paced well was Witches of Ash and Ruin by E. Latimer. Buy her book. But I'm not just saying this because I know her and I like her and think you should all buy her book. There's so much going on in this plot in the best way. You've got coming of age witch story with the main character. You've got kind of a power structure at play here with one of the other witches who kind of feels like she should be in power. You've got the romance, which is unstoppable. And on top of all of that, should you find yourself at any moment feeling like you've caught your breath with all of that stuff going on, there's a witch hunter out. People are getting murdered. And I just think all of the plots weave together really well to give that perfect blend of so much tension and so many things happening while still giving you breaths of relief, you know, with the cool world of the witches, with the romance. There's always things happening even when people aren't being murdered. But then, you know, sometimes people are being murdered to keep things spicy.
A book that I thought was really well paced is actually Wild Blue Wonder by Carly Sorosiak. This is a sort of fabulous book. It reads very much like a contemporary though, and so it's very slow paced, but that slow pace works really well for it. I never really wanted to put this book down. The timeline in this flips back and forth to the summer where the main character's best friend died and the summer after. And that back and forth really kept me engaged. It kept the story moving. It kept asking and answering questions back and forth in a way that felt really natural and made me want to keep reading. The balance that was struck in this book between those two timelines was impeccable. Yeah, just for a contemporary-like book with just like the barest hint, the barest little sprinkling of fabulism, I feel like this does it so incredibly well, and it's really underrated. So like, please go read it.
So one book that really stands out to me with regards to pacing is Vicious by V.E. Schwab. Books that alternate between different timelines can be a disaster, but Victoria Schwab does a really great job of weaving together Eli and Victor's college years versus the present 10 years later. This book isn't necessarily fast-paced. It's not some big adventure novel. It's kind of a slower, tension-building book, but the way that she paces it and weaves these storylines together makes you constantly wonder what's going to happen next. How do these guys get their superpowers? How do they become enemies? What are they each plotting now? And just the way that she slowly reveals information and interweaves the stories together and builds tension is masterful.